welcome all of you to this conversation with Sudeep Chakravarti. His book Pollen City is on many of my generation would remember the murder of Geeta Chopra and Sanjay Chopra in 1978. Sudeep's book is on the murder and the aftermath. So let's talk to him about that because like all of you know, this of that generation, especially in the 60s and those who grew up in the 60s, 70s and 80s, this was a murder that remained a milestone in our lives. A time when we suddenly realized that all is not safe. Public spaces suddenly brought to light the dangers lurking in public spaces, the lack of safe conveyance, transport, and how the police force responds and so on. A lot of media attention was there, and now let's hear it from Sudeep on why he chose to write this book on the murder and the aftermath. And Sudeep, over to you. What made you select this topic for your book?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for being here. What made me choose this book? I think it really chose me. I think if I may just sort of reword what I was trying to say, what I will say is that the event took place in 1978. Geeta and Sanjay Chopra were murdered by the hyphenated killers, Billa and Ranga, who come to us hyphenated even to this day, more than 40 years after they were accused of killing Geeta Chopra, who was 17 years old, and her younger brother, Sanjay Chopra. It was a very well-known case at that time. And it transfixed New Delhi, it transfixed the nation. It brought the capital city of India to a complete standstill. It was remarkable in the way how the killing of two youngsters, unfortunately, deaths happen in our country all too frequently. But the murder of these two, the double murder, and the absolutely brutal way in which they were killed. And I will talk about that because we mustn't shy away from what happened and then derive maybe some lessons from that as well. I think I finally had the mind space to do it because this is an event and the trauma of which I have lived with for many decades myself. I'm of the generation of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra. I remember I was in boarding school in Rajasthan, and those days we actually had things called newspapers. Some of us might not know that there are newspapers these days, but that's all we had that time. We had the newspaper and we had the radio. That's all we really had. And I remember that when the newspapers traveled, it took 2 days to travel. This happened over a weekend. So when the report of the death of the siblings came to my school and the library, and I got to see them the following Monday morning, that's all we could talk about that day and for the weeks ahead, because these were people like us. And maybe that's what, it was a very middle-class trauma, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't the forgotten murders which don't even get a mention in the news, the forgotten murders of forgotten people. But maybe this drew the fascination of India, if you will, and certainly Delhi, which came to a complete standstill for days on end. And there was an uproar in Parliament, which I'll talk about, some lovely dramatis personae during that time. And this has remained with me, and after that I've sort of bookended the book. When I was trying to set the time and place for the book, just a double murder, just a true crime reconstruction was not really what I wanted to begin with or end with. I wanted to tell a larger story of the times, of the trauma, of what was going on in Delhi, in India at that time, and contextualize the double murder in that time and space. And when I was searching for that, I found that the emergency had taken place just a few years before. The children were killed on 26th of August, 1978, and we'd just come out of the emergency. Indira Gandhi had lost the elections in a landslide. The first significant coalition government of India was in power at that time, the Janata government, in which the Hindu alt-right of the day was a part of that coalition government. Let's remember that. A left-of-center government with a right-of-center coalition partner. Strange things happened, ladies and gentlemen. So there were these fascinating things happening, and then this dark arc that I found was bookended on the other side with the anti-Sikh riots in 1984, which I lived through in Delhi. I had just graduated at that time. I was looking for work. trying to see if I was getting to work or go do my post-graduation. And I lived through that time, and I remember that these years were exceedingly dark moments, especially as a youngster. It was as if the sun would never ever shine again. It was a very doomsday kind of situation in the chaotic, shambolic government, people behaving like emperors and empresses, absolute monkey business in parliament. And then Indira Gandhi comes back in 1980, Sanjay Gandhi, the heir presumptive, is back, and we are scared because that's how the Gandhis got kicked out in the first place, and now they're back. And he dies, and then who becomes the next heir apparent? And what happens to Indira Gandhi? Then Operation Blue Star happens, and then she's assassinated. And anti-Sikh riots. So there was this amazing dark arc that the murder of these two children were located in. So I carried that time with me for many years, and I was never really able to get the mind space, or maybe even the time to tell the story. Maybe it was too close that I wasn't able to sort of synthesize it in my own mind. Maybe I didn't even have the skill. Maybe if I attempted this book 20 years earlier, maybe I would not have been a good enough writer to write the book. But now, a couple of years ago, when I really began to sit down and write it, and I researched it extensively before COVID hit us, I was then able to synthesize it, put words to feelings I had been carrying all these years. So it was not as if it was a catharsis for me. It seemed like it was a catharsis for my generation as we were growing up. And that's the mood I wanted to carry with me into the book. So I just didn't want to sort of sensationalize it as a double murder, but accord a little dignity to my generation, maybe. I'm just being honest about it. That accord a little dignity to Geeta Chopra, Sanjay Chopra, and alongside vicariously offer a little dignity to my generation who've lived through these times. So I think that's how I began that's what led me to write the story, and which is why the book now instead of then. Maybe I didn't have the words for it then. I have the words for it now.
Shruti, what is sad is that 45 years later, after the murder of their siblings, we are still talking about the Nirbhaya case. We are still talking about the horrific rape and murder of the young doctor at Arjikar Hospital. We are still debating about how a few days ago a pregnant mother was pushed out of a train in a rape attempt and so on. So the horrific nature of the crimes against women do not seem to change. And through your book does not pinpoint just on the rape. You cover a period of change when India was on the cusp of great change. Like you said, the emergency had happened and then a new coalition government was in place. What is it that you wanted to attempt to tell through the story? Because while you were attempting to tell the story of the siblings, you've said in the book that you were unable to talk to the parents as such. So can you tell us what is the kind of research and what is the effort that you take to take this story to a completely new set of readers?
Well, thank you for that. And here I will, as we're journalists, our DNA is of journalists, even though I've left mainstream journalism some decades ago, but in my heart, mind, and soul, I continue to be a journalist, and my research is like a journalist. So thank you for that opportunity to explain myself. But I want to make one thing very clear, is that I don't want to present myself as a grand story of research and delivery. It's something that I am trained to do. Research is something that one is intrinsically, inherently, and I can run out of adjectives, and I never will, trained to do. This is what we do. We tell stories. We tell the stories of other people. These are rarely our own stories. We are the sutradhars. We are the interpreters of a time and a place, right? So this is very much that. But before I launch into just how grand my research process was, I think it is important to address the first thing that you mentioned. And here, forgive me if it sounds a bit like mansplaining. It just so happens I'm male. I can't get away from that truth. I'm a cis male, which can get really tricky in today's day and age. Even so, one of the things that struck me, and it's always struck me, just that I had my opportunity to articulate this in this book, is that with all these gross crimes, and mostly against women and against children, which we forget, there are crimes against children that happen horrifically every day across the country, which we don't talk about enough. We really don't talk about enough. There are crimes against gay men, which we don't talk about enough. I mean, there are crimes of all kinds, sexual.
Elderly people also.
Sorry?
Elderly people
Elderly
also.
people also. So, I mean, all manner of crime. So, but the nub of it, and if you take it to abuse of women or sexual crimes against women or killings of women, from dowry to rape and molestation to just simple harassment, everyday harassment that women face and children face and all kinds of people face. It is so ironical, ladies and gentlemen, that in all these years where these kind of gory events and these kind of horrific events have highlighted the crime for us, and we've gone on to make, and because of OTT, because of sort of the post-media world that we live in, or a hyper-media world we live in, these are now played out across, there is a terrific series on OTT, on Netflix, Amazon Prime kind of platforms, on the Nirbhaya killings. I mean, it is as if, it's pay-per-view murder in a way. I know I'm overstating the point here. And since we're talking about Billa and Ranga, there's just a series out on Netflix called Black Warrant, which begins with the opening sequence, episode is of this jailer's view of when he was in Tihar jail and how he viewed Billa and Ranga and so on and so forth. So that is the kind of aspect we live in. And I was very, very clear and very disturbed by the fact that we talk about all these deaths and all these killings and high profile and low profile and completely ignored. But the law and order that we always strive for, and the hope that we've had that with each of these horrific crimes, that our criminal justice system, our investigative system, our legal system will keep getting better and better and better. Unfortunately, there is no zero crime state. Unfortunately, I mean, you will appreciate this. Though that might have been the wrong choice of word. Forgive me for that. You will understand this, is I think what I've tried to say. I ought to have said. But it just simply gets more intense, it gets more helpless. Even though we seem to have ever better police forces, an ever better legal system, an ever better judicial representation. We have lawyers who work pro bono increasingly on cases. There are case studies. There is mass media appeal. And yet, it seems that we cannot keep up with the crimes that we hope would not happen in the way that they have. There is greater oversight. There is better investigation. And yet, the crimes don't stop. So you have a RG Kaur. You have a Nirbhaya. You have so many others. There is, I mean, why leave women out of it? You have Sheena Bora's murder case, for which her mother was accused. Not just some weeks ago, there was this lady from Bangalore who traveled with the body of a 4-year-old child. For heaven's sake, I mean, we are a sick society. Maybe we need to now we need to own up to our sickness, maybe, as much. Now,
Sudeep, may I interrupt you? This is just the cities. And the inner cities and the rural areas see even more horrific crime, the killing of Dalits, of women.
Indeed.
So I think it's all over the country you see these incidents of violence.
Absolutely. And it seems to get more amped up, and to the extent that we look for ever more horrific crimes to feel pathos. I mean, look at us. I mean, let's confront ourselves. I mean, this book is as much a mirror to my generation as a mirror to ourselves. And here, I don't want to sound, sort of self-righteous for a minute, ladies and gentlemen, either. I do not wish to sound over-indignant or self-righteous. I am part of the sick society myself, even though I choose to write about it. And here, maybe I would sort of segue into the research that you talked about. I was traveling back in time, literally traveling back in time. And so research entailed, and maybe I sort of marry my journalistic training with my novelistic passion, or passion to narrate. So I've always tried to, even as a journalist, I try to bring in color, or bring in anecdotes, and humanize the situation, go beyond statistics to people, actual names, places, people. So similarly, I think to establish that, it was very important for me to recreate the time. So I went to Delhi, I was there for several months, and I was in the Nehru Memorial Library and other archives. And I was there for months on end, every day looking through the daily news of the papers, several papers, trying to capture the time. So if I write, as I have in this book, that the blue bottle flies, which are the sort of the carrion eaters of Delhi, which I over-dramatize when I call it that. So when I say that even the wings of a blue bottle fly are tired that morning, the day that the children were killed, I can do so because I know the humidity of that day, because I got it from the newspaper. So when I write about the context, about the evening that Geeta and Sanjay Chopra were going to record the Yuvavani program of Western music in All India Radio, and they were taking a lift, and that's how they were kidnapped or abducted by Birla and Ranga.
It was a rainy day, that's why they decided
Indeed,
to take a taxi.
indeed. But one would have thought that they could have walked that last 1 kilometer if they only hadn't decided to take that lift for that last, literally the last mile. They might have still been alive. But anyway, that's how life is. And so the programs on the day, what movies were running, you know, what was the traffic delays on that day? What was happening in Parliament? What was happening in a sleazy cabaret in Connaught Place, not far? What was happening in All India Radio? What was happening in the parks? What was happening in Delhi, around Delhi, in India? So I had to recreate that moment, that time and place in order to talk about what was the life that the children led? What was their life? What was the universe of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra? What was the universe of Birla and Ranga? What universe were they operating in? And so on and so forth. So it needed a kind of an intense archival research, which I was happy to do because I love spending time in libraries and archives and looking at it. And just to wrap that, the other thing that I find very, very important for my research, and I apply it to everything, even if I'm writing about history, something that happened 250 or 300 or 400 years ago, I need to be there. I need to visit the place, even if the events are long over. So I actually walked several hundred kilometers in Delhi, walking along the route of the abduction, walking along the route of the crime, literally on the roads, walking the route where a good Samaritan spotted them, walking the route to their home in Dhola Kuan, and then walking all the way back through the northern ridge up to Mandir Marg and the ridge itself where they were killed. So I walked hundreds of kilometers and I've worn out a favorite pair of suede shoes of mine, but for a good cause, I think, one to do that. So I think one needs to mix archival research with sense memory. I think sense memory is very, very important to feel it. If you don't feel it, you can't tell it.
But Sudeep, we had to interrupt for journalists. Primary sources are very important. So you must have spoken to a lot of people who were close friends and so on. But you haven't said why you were not able to speak to the parents.
And that's a diligent journalist who just pointed out that I have one aspect of the question unanswered. Thank you very much. You do realize we're complimenting each other at this point. Good, thank you. Just putting it out there. Full transparency, ladies and gentlemen. This is full disclosure. It was very important. In fact, you and I were talking about this just before we came on stage, is that one of the things that happened as a course of writing this book is that the parents of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra, Captain Madan Chopra, and who later became a rear admiral, and Mrs. Roma Chopra, the mother, they refused to speak to me. And I respected that. And you might ask me that how can you tell a story about Geeta and Sanjay Chopra and the time and the place by not talking to the parents? Because I have to accord them the dignity they deserve. I have to accord them the respect they deserve. I cannot, like many of my colleagues, younger colleagues I might add, I know where they live. I know the address, I know the street, I know the phone numbers, I have the email addresses, I know their whole community. I know where they go for their meetings, I know which club they go to, when they go to the club. I know everything. But I could not bring myself to walk up to the door, ring the bell, and say, I'm Sudeep Chakravarti, I'm going to write about the death of your 2 children. Will you talk to me? And how do you feel 40 years later? I cannot do that. That is ghoulish. That is inhuman. How can I do that? I cannot do that. I cannot bring myself
A
to
lot
do
of
that.
television journalists do that.
But-
They shove a mic and ask you, you know, when you look at children nowadays,
Well,
do
maybe
you
that's
think
why I'm
about
not in
your children
television.
and
That's
so
why
on?
I'm not in television. I never have been in television. And people tell me you ought to be on television, but now you've answered the question. I probably can't stand myself on television, were I on television, to ask these questions. I know I'm overstating the case, and after this comment, I'll never get a job on TV. So be it. Doesn't matter. I'll continue to tell stories where I need to. But seriously, coming back to that, what I then decided to do is that I decided to reach out to Captain Chopra, Madan Chopra and Roma Chopra through mutual friends who had got to know them like fellow journalists, like Usha Rai, who's like sort of showed the path to so many women journalists of India during that time. She was a pioneer, like along with Prabha Dutt, the mother of the journalist Barkha Dutt, for instance. These were pioneering journalists of the time. They showed the way. So I reached out to Usha Rai, who I knew her son, we'd been colleagues and so on and so forth. So I said, Usha ji, I want to come and talk to you. And I want to interview you anyway about your time, but, because you lived through it all. And while I was meeting her, I said, I have this problem. I know, my every instinct tells me to go and barge in on the Chopras. I cannot bring myself to do it. Can you do it for me? So she actually called Roman Chopra in front of me and put this in her drawing room in Gurgaon, or Gurugram, which I refuse to call it Gurgaon. Sorry, I'm a bit eccentric that way. So she puts the mobile phone on the table, dials Roman Chopra's number. Roman Chopra comes on, a very suave, sophisticated, very neutral English Delhi voice, privileged voice. And Usha says, this is Sudeep Chakravarti, I know him, I know his work, he means well, he doesn't sensationalize, he wants to write about Geeta and Sanjay and the time that, and I just heard this immediate response saying, absolutely not. And through my gestures, I was trying to tell Usha Rai that, could you please ask her if her husband will speak? And right then she chimed in saying, and Madan won't speak either. And that was it. That was it for me. So what I then had to do is to get around the parents. So I spoke to people who were around then and get their views and speak to them. And circumvent it. One advantage I had is because I didn't style it like a biography of Geeta and Sanjay. If I had, then I would have had to somehow or the other, it would have been a failed project or attempt if I hadn't spoken to the parents. But I sought to tell a larger story of the times. So yes, about Geeta and Sanjay Chopra's deaths, about a true crime reconstruction, about the arrest of Birla and Ranga, about the investigation, the judicial process, the several layers of the judicial process and appeals going up and down, death penalties being rescinded and then sort of reimposed, and finally their execution on 31st of January 1982. It went on for 3.5 years, so it was a long span. But I could work around this simply because it wasn't a biography of the children. So I reached out to other people, and one question I got asked last week at the Jaipur Literature Festival by someone who actually lived on the apartment above the Chopras in Dhaula Kuan in the naval officers' accommodation. And like Captain Chopra had become, his father had also become a rear admiral. So he asked me, did you even bother to reach out? I said, yes. I even reached out to the naval kids. So when Roma Chopra finally, ladies and gentlemen, passed away in October 2024, just a few months ago, I got to know about her passing through the naval officers' children who sent me a message saying, just to let you know that Auntie Roma has passed away. After so many decades, and I was just in tears because this woman had finally found peace. So one had to go around this way. So it was very, very important to accord the dignity to the children and to the family, which they did not get when they were alive. I was very determined that I will not write a book or a story where, even though they're the centerpiece, they should not be undignified. I should not be undignified about it. That even after 45 years, they should get the dignity they deserve, then as now, and the parents should too. So I was very, very clear that I will not cross this line. It was a very difficult line to not cross.
Yet, Sudeep, in the book, you described the day Geeta and Sanjay went to the All India Radio for a recording. So you capture what was the ambience like in their room. They had shared a room. So it's very, very, like visually, he writes about it. descriptively about the room that they shared together, the bags, the shoes, the books, and the table, and the cake, piece of cake that Geeta had baked but not eaten. She had just bit a slice of it and left it back on the table. I thought that was very, very painful even to read and for the parents to kind of process. How did you get those kind of details, the small details that you've woven into the book about the bit of cake and the way the room was and so on?
Well, research, research, research. There is no way around that. I sort of scoured the archives of newspapers and magazines in Hindi and in English for years on end. I mean, years on end worth of research, which I had to do in a few months. But I was morning to evening, and I cannot thank the archivists of the Nehru Memorial Library enough because it let me work extra hours at the archives because I said, I don't live in Delhi anymore. I just have this much time. Can you help me? They helped me. They gave me extra days and hours. I cannot thank them enough. And so I had to sit and look through the papers. I had to look through microfilm records. Nehru Memorial still has microfilms, not digital archives in the sense that we know it. So I had to sit with the spools and spooling paper after paper, day after day, for years together to get that kind of detail. Magazines, any stray information that I had to follow up on. And then I had enough information. And you never have enough information. You always wish for more. We are information junkies, you and I, so we know what we say. So, and then I had a story to tell, then I could build a narrative around it. And it was not just about this poignant detail about this cake that Geeta had baked and left on her table and saying she'd come back and eat it. And that had become a shrine. Just the cake had become a shrine because the parents wouldn't get rid of the cake their daughter had baked, who's no longer with them. These little details. But there were other interesting details which I found, which are sort of tragic-comic. And here I'm going to do a bit of name dropping, because Morarji Desai was a prime minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the foreign minister of India at that time. The Jansang, as I mentioned earlier, was a part of the coalition government. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee, this great orator and flamboyant speaker, got dragged into this whole thing because one of the things that happened soon after the murders were discovered and the papers went to town on it, it was headline news for weeks on end. And again, weeks on end after when Birla and Ranga were captured in September of that year, in a very accidental way. And then through the judicial process. Net, front page news for a very long time. And one of the things that happened was that the students of Delhi, both in school and college, because Geeta was in the first year of Jesus and Mary College, so you had college students being outraged, and Sanjay Chopra was the class 10 student of the modern school on Barakhamba Road, those of you who know Delhi. So school students were outraged. So you had thousands of students from major and minor schools of Delhi and many, many colleges of Delhi from as far as away as 12 kilometers, 15 kilometers, from South Delhi colleges, from North Delhi colleges, from Central Delhi schools, who walked to the boat club, which is no longer the point of protest in Delhi anymore because it's got shifted for political reasons. But those days, the boat club in Delhi, which faced the Rashtrapati Bhavan and North Block and South Block, is where people would go to protest. So these thousands of students congregated spontaneously, and their teachers with them. Everybody walked for Sanjay and Geeta. Everybody walked for themselves because they identified with the generation. They were outraged because they're saying if it could happen to them, it can happen to us. So you have to be accountable, you have to be answerable. They gave a memorandum to the president. They wanted to give a memorandum to the lieutenant governor. And in this moment, Atal Bihari Vajpayee wades in because he considers himself to be a great diplomat and peacemaker. He's, after all, the foreign minister of the country. And Vajpayee, Atalji being Atalji, Mr. Vajpayee being Mr. Vajpayee, he's a bit of a drama queen. And let me say this, he knows his moment. He knows his time and place. He knows theater. He's like a grandmaster of political theatrics, as we later came to know. So he chooses to go to the boat club to confront the students and calm them down. And the only place that he's got is on the bonnet of a police jeep. And he doesn't have and he picks up a megaphone, like the police have the megaphone for announcing. He picks up the megaphone and he begins to talk to the school children and college children, and nobody wants to listen to him because they're angry. They want results, they don't want platitudes. So somebody throws a brickbat at him and he gets a gash on his forehead. It begins to bleed. So he's taken immediately to Willingdon Hospital, the Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital, after which drama queen that he is, Atal Bihari Vajpayee in a white kurta pajama with bled out, so there's red splotches of blood on his kurta and his pajamas. There's a bandage around his head because he's got stitches at Willingdon Hospital. So there's a bandage with bloody splotch. He walks into the Lok Sabha like that and just sort of sits like a wounded, diva. And Parliament erupts. It comes to a complete standstill. I mean, like, what happened, etc., etc. And of course, the usual, whenever we have something to protest, even today we say, shame, shame, but we do damn all about it. That's another story. So of course, Parliament came to a standstill and the government took full advantage of it. Congress party, which was then in the opposition, asked for accountability because Morarji Desai, the Prime Minister, was also the Home Minister. And Vajpayee was this flamboyant person who came and said, so there were these sideshows happening around the murder of the Chopra, Geeta Chopra and Sanjay Chopra. So there was these dramatis personae who came into the story of the death and the afterlife of these two siblings in the strangest and the most unique and even ghoulish ways possible. So imagine the irony of it. Geeta and Sanjay Chopra are dead. Everybody's aghast. But in Parliament, when the discussions happen, every speaker, and Mr. Vajpayee as well, becomes a centerpiece of attention. And till today, and I want to say this because I might forget later, we have forgotten about Geeta and Sanjay Chopra, but we remember Billa and Ranga. How ironical can it be? We remember the two who killed them. They're hyphenated in posterity. But how many of us spend the time for the two children that they actually killed, because of which they became the hyphenated, joined in infamy, hyphenated at the hip, for forever and ever. So, Billa Ranga, so jao bacho, Billa Ranga aega. That was a threat if you didn't sleep. And so on and so forth.
At the same time, while we're talking, I'm sure many of us would have seen Death Warrant, Black Warrant, and the Billa Ranga case has been discussed in it through the eyes of the jailer Sunil Gupta. But at the same time, you had access to the post-mortem reports. So you were telling me while we were sitting there that you did not want to write about the gory details that were there in the post-mortem because you wanted to respect what Geeta went through and you also wanted to spare the feelings of the parents. So what kind of, what made you to be a little more careful because you knew that? You had read the post-mortem reports and it was a ghastly murder. The two children were slashed and horribly killed. Would you talk a little bit about that?
And, as part of the research...
1 second, Sudeep. And also how the police failed. There were many people who saw the two children being driven through the main road in Delhi in a Fiat. And they had asked for help. And someone had reported it, but the police never acted. So both the things, please.
So let me finish with the police thing first, just to get that out of the way. But it's important. There was a delay in passing the information on to the police in Delhi because one do-gooder, a good Samaritan, saw that these two children who were struggling in this Fiat car, and a guy called Indrajit Singh Nauto, who was a civil engineer with the Delhi Development Authority. And like in those days, the scooter was the main mode of transport in Delhi, so he was on his Vespa and he was going home, and he saw this happening, and he went to a police station, and he reported it. And they didn't take him seriously at all, saying, jhagra kya hoga, or something like that. There must have been some fighting or some trouble, and carried on. And they didn't pass the message on because the scooter or the car had by then gone beyond the jurisdiction of that police station area. So the information became contained in a silo of the police station where it was reported, but not the adjacent police station where if they had the information and the police van or the police control room had the information that they could disseminate to all the police vans or the jeeps or the lookout notices over there. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen because it sat over there. And that was one of the investigations that happened afterwards, saying, the simplest of things didn't take place. And therefore it went into this sort of spiral of hype and drama in that particular way. So it was a misstep, and I think Delhi police paid a very heavy price for it. People lost their jobs because Morarji Desai, who was the Home Minister, had to also show that his government was working, because it was very embarrassing for him. Because the government was calling the previous Congress government utterly lawless because of the emergency. And here was his own government being shown up to be incompetent in this high-profile murder. Now, coming to the post-mortem, ladies and gentlemen, it's those of you who are associated with police or security services, or those of you who are in the medical profession as students or as practitioners, I mean, you know how detailed the pathologist's report can be. It is down to the last absolutely gory detail and told clinically. So when I saw that report, it had everything. It had every bit of detail, and it was also part of the judicial records. Now, when I started reading that, I was traumatized because, you could actually see, in my mind's eye, as I read, male, approximately 15, 6-inch cut. Sorry, I don't have a lapel mic, otherwise I could have acted it out for you. Has a cut over here. So that means when they were hitting him with a sword and a dagger, he put his hands up. So he got slashed here. There's sort of lateral cuts over here, right? Then he was blocking his head. So there are cuts deep over here into the bone, the elbow joint. And then he, in pain, he turned over. So there are gashes on his back. So when you read these reports saying 6-inch, bone deep, 1.5-inch, X centimeter, X inch, you know what they were going through, that they were flailing, which is why the cuts happened, the slashes happened. And I actually sat with a cardiac surgeon called Amrish Satwik, who practices at the Gangaram Hospital in Delhi, a fine writer himself. So I actually went to Amrish's office, his clinic, his hospital office, and I said, Amrish, you need to help me. Am I interpreting it the right way? Because I'm not a medical man. I'm not a medical specialist. So I'd written it up, and I said, Amrish, did this happen at that time? Did this happen? Did they turn over? And you could say, the thighs getting slashed. And Gita's, my God, because it said that there is no blood left in the body because she was hacked so badly that she bled out completely. So when she was discovered, the patch of grass in Buddha Jayanti Park was dark. So this girl had just bled out. And they had sexually molested her. Those details were in the postmortem report. And I just couldn't bring myself to put that in the book because I just wanted to protect her. So I paraphrased bits of those, when it was related to, information related to her private parts, for instance. I just sort of paraphrased those. I didn't want to go into a bit of detail. And I decided then that I will interpret the postmortem report not as a sensationalist, in a sensationalist manner, which I could so easily have done, because it's ghoulish. When you read it, you're transfixed. And even now when I'm talking about it, I have goose pimples because it's as if I was reliving their death. It's that detail. So I decided that I will interpret the postmortem report as what it actually was, a proof of their struggle to prevent being attacked in the way they were, to stop the daggers, to stop the sword slashes, to stop being molested, to stop. So I recreated the postmortem into an event which spoke of their fight back, that we refused to die, we refused to go quietly. Of course, they went horrifically. But so it was a deliberate decision I took to damp a little bit of the private details for Geeta and also clear up the death of Sanjay and Geeta through the postmortem report to make it a fight back, a kind of a battle. So I actually have a line in the chapter which I talk about the postmortem report, and I think I end the chapter, not I think, I do end the chapter. See, this is what you get for being a brown sahib. You get too sort of taken up with your words. So I end the chapter by saying, and till life left them, Geeta and Sanjay fought and fought and fought. And that's how I end the chapter, because that's really what it was. So, so it was, I can only imagine what the two kids went through. And I know what they went through.
In the death warrant, Billa and Ranga is shown as, Billa is kind of crying and all the time while he's taken to the noose, while Ranga is the stoic one who refuses to talk to anyone and so on. What were your reactions? What were your impressions of this kind of killer duo when you read the reports and the police reports and spoke to policemen who were involved in the case?
I think they were completely unrepentant because I've talked to people of that time and I look at their judicial statements, their statements of record when came in front of a magistrate and given the initial statements. They seem to be completely unrepentant. And there are transcripts where there is the recording, the magistrate who recorded the statements of confession actually has parenthetical explanation saying laughs or smiles, stops to smile or laugh. I mean, it was like they were on show. It was the greatest show of their lives. They were under the arc lights and they were reveling in it. And Billa and Ranga did not seem to be repentant till the last day they died. And Billa didn't seem repentant at all, even though he was blabbering and blubbering and breaking down. It evidently was because he was in fear of his life being extinguished rather than repentance for the crime that he was accused of committing. And Ranga went stone cold. He wouldn't react at all. In fact, if I may, there are bits of the book where I just wanted to share with you these Prabha and Usha Rai and 4 other journalists actually went to the government and went to the Supreme Court to get a petition. Actually, Prabha herself did it, and the others benefited from it so that they could interview Billa and Ranga in Tihar jail, right? But, so it was a bit of an uphill battle for that. But when they met Billa, Ranga refused to be interviewed. Billa wanted to be interviewed. But when they met Billa, and just a little bit, if I may, just share with you things that Billa said when he was being interviewed by the journalists, some of whom I've spoken to as research for the book. The journalists trooped into Tihar for their interaction with Billa. Billa was all jittery bravado, and that caught the mood that Hindustan Times announced with the headline, "Trembling legs betray Billa on death's eve." That mood was diluted with an opposite tone in a secondary headline that carried the story onto the back page, on page 16. Billa laughs on death's eve. So it was a bit of a contradictory time. And as he was saying, and he was showing off, he was saying a lot of bravado, and Usha Rai, when I spoke to her, I said, Ushaji, what did you think of Billa and Ranga when you met them? So he said, Billa was not a big man, he was just a tiny, puny man. And here I quote her. And yet, she said, he was just so full of malice, he was just so malignant that you could sense it. And he was, of course, asked by all the journalists that, did you do the crime? What about Geeta and Sanjay? And they don't really sort of, so Prabha, Barkha's mother, asks Billa, what about the murder of Sanjay and Geeta? Asks that. And Billa responds, I will take the truth with me. Then why are your legs trembling? Usha Rai asks. Not at all, he shot back. But he couldn't mask the nervous laughter that escaped the protestation. And there were these sort of grand Hindi movie or Bollywood-style dialogues that Billa was spouting from time to time, like as Patra, Prakash Patra, who was a journalist with UNI at the time, National Herald, and then subsequently the Telegraph. So Prakash tells me that he was bombastic and speaking about himself in the third person. As we know, somebody else likes to do that as well, but that is not part of our session this evening. I leave it to your imagination. So he says, Billa kisi se darta nahi, or Billa is not afraid of anybody. Billa ko kisi se parwa nahi, sirf Rab ke siwai. Billa doesn't give a damn about anyone except God. So, there were these right to the day, and this interview took place the evening before they were executed. So this was January 30, 1982, and they were hanged in the morning of January 31, 1982. Even then, there was this sort of drama that was taking place, that Billa and Ranga, who evidently couldn't get over the fact that they were in the grandest theater of their lives. And they were living it to the hilt, And their cases, their death warrants and their death sentences, which kept getting pushed back and getting reimposed, traveled right from the district and sessions court where such cases typically begin, And then the lawyers appealed to the High Court and then finally to the Supreme Court. And you had the best names of the legal world of the time, including Justice Chandrachud, our recent Chief Justice's father, who was then in the Supreme Court and lording it over. It came to the older Mr. Justice Chandrachud. Soli Sorabji was part of her representation. All kinds of people were in, who we subsequently have come to know as legal luminaries of the entire country. They were part of the Birla and Ranga case. And alongside you had these sideshows of Charles Sobraj, who was in Tihar jail at the same time that Birla and Ranga was. And he seemed to be somewhat defensive because Charles Sobraj was this grand star criminal. He was used to, the spotlight. And suddenly he felt that Birla and Ranga had sort of crashed into his spotlight party. And so he started commenting, he started calling the media and started announcing all kinds of things, including he's been commissioned to write his own biography for a grand advance with some foreign publisher, all kinds of rubbish, and petitioning the Supreme Court so that he would be moved from his cell, which he felt had too many natives or brown people, to a cell which had white people, which had foreigners, and he wanted air conditioning. And it went up to the Supreme Court of India, ladies and gentlemen. So, that is why I wanted to draw a wider arc. So there is a story of Birla and Ranga, there is a story of Geeta and Chopra, but through this parallel story of India during those days, Delhi during those days, and what was happening, what wasn't happening, there was this sort of multiple acts and sideshows, political and social and economic, that were taking place alongside this grand crime and its investigation and its aftermath. So I wanted very much to capture that as well.
Sudeep, I'm sure you've described, you've seen how Delhi has fallen further. This is a fallen city. I think it's still falling, I think, in some ways. But I'm sure, thank you so much. I'm sure there are people who want to ask you questions, even though they may not have lived through the times. So,
Sudeep, I'm sorry I haven't read the book yet. I hope to rectify that soon. I'm thinking of the lawyers who defended these people. Could you give us some more information about that?
Thank you for asking that. In fact, this became a cause célèbre for the death penalty. So, in fact, Birla's lawyer, and they decided to sort of petition the judicial system together when they were talking about how they should not get a death penalty and they should get life instead in jail. It was predicated on the logic, on the argument that, just because they've taken a life, taking their life will not sort the inhumanity of taking life itself. So this is a debate that continues today. That should there be death penalty in India? I mean, this is something that we discuss in the present day. So the argument came up to the Supreme Court at that time because Birla and Ranga's lawyer carried that humaneness or inhumanness of the death penalty argument to them. So they were they were to be executed. There is, as you would know, that in the rarest of rare cases, death penalty is given for these, and the crime is so heinous, etc., etc. You should read the court records, the judicial pronouncements and the orders and the arguments of the Chief Justices of India, or the Supreme Court benches, the High Court benches of the judges. Fascinating use of words. So it was amazing that these two criminals, these two thugs, bumbling thugs who killed these two people, among others that they killed, became a cause célèbre for reviewing India's death penalty. So there was a big argument that developed over their ask. There's another thing that they triggered. They caused a constitutional crisis, or nearly a constitutional crisis, because at that time, the Birla and Ranga's lawyers, when the Supreme Court said that now I'm done, and the only person who can offer clemency is the President of India, Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy at that time, when it went to Mr. Reddy, these lawyers questioned the power of the President to offer clemency in the first place. And they argued that the President hasn't offered clemency because of political reasons, because it's become a show trial. You have to be seen to do justice. You cannot let these two go, Birla and Ranga, so they have to be executed as a palliative for the citizens of Delhi and the citizens of India. So they created a constitutional crisis at that time because they called to question the power of the president over the legislature and over the judiciary. And if you read the commentary of the time, and reported very well in the media, and some exceptionally well in India Today of those days, which was a very different magazine in the 1970s and 80s and 90s and 2000s when I was there than it is now. But that's another story for another time. So imagine that this murder and its investigation and its arrest and its judicial process created so many ripples beyond Tihar, beyond your expected boundaries. It just went up and down the ladder. So that's why they were front page news so often. And I hope I've been able to address some of that you asked. Well, even if you don't, my sincere thanks that you've, in Trivandrum, Kerala, at MBIFL 2025, there's so many of you, some of us have left, but so many of you actually sat through a session on a book on Delhi because you believed in what we were trying to bring. So my sincere thanks to you for just doing that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sudeep. Thank you for that
Thank you
very informative session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very crucial discussion, a crucial matter of discussion dealt very strategically by a policy analyst with so much of expertise. Thank you very much, Sudeep sir, and thank you, Saraswati ma'am. I would like to now invite Ms. Saraswati to give the token of love and gratitude from Mathrubhumi to Mr. Sudeep.